Technology plays a key role in the great success of Amazon as a worldwide corporation. Pittsburgh, of course, now a growing center for technology, from Google to robotics, self-driving cars. Its university is another asset that could be a big factor in Amazon's headquarters decision. We're pleased to welcome two new guests who have watched technology grow in this region. Audrey Russo is President and Chief Executive Officer of the Pittsburgh Technology Council. Jennifer Beam is editor of the Pittsburgh Business Times. Welcome to both of you. So your reaction to the news that we made it to the top 20. Audrey, let me start with you.
Well, listen, it's no surprise to me that we made it to the top 20. I think we're going to make it to the top 5. So it's great for Pittsburgh. It's great for us to have this kind of notoriety. And we're getting, exposure and inquiries from lots of other companies as well. So this is really additive. I see this as an important part of our journey in the next evolution of Pittsburgh and technology.
Let's talk about those other companies in a minute. But if you're willing to say top 5, are you willing to say that you think we're going to get it?
I think we'll be in the top 5.
That's as far as you'll go?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Jennifer, a prediction?
I think there's a chance that we could get it. I don't think it's a given by any means. I don't think Amazon has making a final decision yet.
So when you look at the list of 20, what surprises you as to who's there or who's not there?
Well, I think it was surprising that Detroit wasn't on the list. And the fact that Amazon came out and said they didn't have enough talent. And that was really one of the deficits that they had in Detroit. So that's sort of interesting because there's a lot of space in Detroit. And there have been some interesting investments that have occurred there and people sort of doing what we did about 20 years ago. And I would have thought that would have been appealing, particularly in the auto industry and some of the downstream markets there. And I think the other thing that's interesting is that there is 2 locations that are close to DC. So, with Bezos' background and interest in the Post and important to be close to government and all the kinds of things that are tied to logistics. It's interesting that they went to both.
Okay, so you're saying that so far, to go back to your previous point, just being mentioned, just getting good publicity even before making the top 20, a New York Times columnist had come out and said Pittsburgh is going to be a Forbes magazine ranked us highly. You're saying that alone has had a halo effect?
That's definitely a halo effect.
In what concrete ways?
Well, there are some companies I can't really talk about. We know for sure that there's a surge of what's happening on the West Coast right now of people who are looking at building their companies out there and saying for the first time, this might not be the right place for me to build my company. We're also seeing a trend of, and you've heard it more recently, like Redfin, Apple have said we need to locate outside of Silicon Valley, and we're going to be looking at that. What that means in terms of jobs and in terms of areas and what terms of topics that they're going to be, specifically interested in, that's debatable at this point. But we know here with our capabilities in artificial intelligence and autonomous vehicles, the Internet of Things, we're certainly at the forefront of innovation. And it would be attractive to them. I think a lot of people are saying in Silicon Valley and on the West Coast, there are other parts of the world that are no longer should be flown over.
Amazon, Jennifer, is already here.
Yes, they are. They have a sortation center in the West End that they opened in 2015. It's around 400,000 square feet. And then they also have a tech office on the south side that's around 15,000 square feet. And they've grown by about 15 people there in the last year and a half since they opened. And they do work with Alexa, Amazon Web Services, and machine translation there.
Okay, so do we know if any of these Amazon Pittsburghers have been part of the mission? Have they been brought in? Have they been leaned on to say, hey, tell Jeff Bezos how great it is here? Are you aware of any efforts?
Of course, on friendly gesture, we've done that. I wouldn't say anything formal, but they would be very excited. They're thrilled about us having a direct flight to Seattle. That's coming up in September. So that's exciting for them at Amazon so that they can have direct pathways back and forth to Amazon and demonstrate the capabilities that are going on here. So they're excited by that. I wouldn't say that they, have the voice of carrying that to their leadership, but they know we're interested.
Pittsburgh's not a stranger to Amazon.
Yeah, it's also important to note that Amazon has a couple of leaders and executives who have Pittsburgh ties, including the CFO, who is from Pittsburgh and attended CMU as well. So.
Isn't it hard to guess what it's going to be?
Yeah.
Because there's so many factors involved: cost of living, transportation, workforce, tech personnel who might be available. There's so many things. Maybe it's the guy who's the CFO. Who? How do you know?
You don't know.
So, people look to you. You're in the jobs that you're in for some insight. Well, let's get to what David was asking last time. What do you think is Pittsburgh's greatest vulnerability in this? You look at who we're up against now that we know. We've got 19 other cities. Anything come to mind right away?
Mm-hmm. Right. I would say that we really have to be aggressive on transportation, getting around, navigating the city. And we've done incredible things by having Uber and Lyft here and making sure that there's, you know, cycling and things like that. But we have to make it very ubiquitous for us to be able to get from point A to point B. Mm-hmm. And as you look at us growing out, whether it's Hazelwood,
it's easier to get from
Larimer,
point A to point B than it is in Boston and Washington, any of these places.
You can get on the subway in Washington and you can get anywhere pretty quickly.
Well, on the days it works.
On the days it works?
Yeah.
Yeah, you might know that. I mean, I don't know if it's, you know, the point is that we have places that are opportunities for us to develop. As you look at Hazelwood and Larimer, where's the access? I think that, and I'm very excited by the new Port Authority leader that we've just picked, and she's very open to trying to figure out some new strategies there.
Is there a location you picture in your mind when you conjure the possibility of Amazon coming here, Jennifer?
You know, the bid hasn't disclosed what locations they're looking at. I mean, you know, you think of Almano, which is near where you're at, as one potential location. But, you know, if you look at where they are in Seattle, they're all over the place. They're more than just in one spot. So I would imagine that they would end up spread out at several locations throughout the city.
But I wanted to hear, Jennifer, you know, we're part of the same fraternity of being skeptics in our business. I wanted to hear your assessment of our vulnerabilities.
Yeah, you know, I do think infrastructure is a big vulnerability. I also think one of the challenges that we face is we do have the stigma of having a huge population loss over the years, and it's stabilized, but we haven't seen a lot of growth in terms of job growth and population growth. And I think that that's something that the people who are pitching to Amazon are going to have to show that we're going to be able to have that job growth and to attract people to this region, because CMU and Pitt are a great starting point and they're a great talent pool for us, but for 50,000 people, that's not going to be enough. They're going to have to be able to bring people into here.
I want to follow up before Audrey says I'm wrong. Do you think we've overhyped what's happened already in Pittsburgh, Jennifer?
It's an interesting question. I think we've done a really good job of promoting what we've done in a positive way and getting that out, which will help us in the long run. You know, whether we've overhyped it or not, the jury's still out on that. We'll have to see what happens if we can start to get more growth going forward.
The inevitable White House denial. Go ahead.
So, you know, the question is, what is overhype? I moved here in 2001, and I thought the city had a huge negative kind of air around their self-esteem. I don't feel that now.
I agree with you completely.
Okay, so that's a shift, and that's exciting. So is that overhype? I don't know. I think it's proud. I think people are aware that there are things going on here that probably blow their mind when they think about the kind of research and the kind of companies that are being started here. And we have done a tremendous job collectively in getting the word out so that the community, our stakeholders, are proud about what's happening in their backyard. I don't think that's overhyped. Do I think there have been a lot of puff pieces about us? Absolutely. It's great. I'd say all coverage is great coverage.
You're not discouraging further puff pieces. You're okay with puff pieces. Who wouldn't be?
Well, no. I mean, you know, the puff pieces. I'm a fact person.
Yeah.
I'm a fact person.
I get it. Can you picture 50,000 new jobs and $5 billion?
And how fast are they going to come, these 50,000?
Yeah, I mean,
over a period of years,
that's the
right?
thing. They're going to be trunched through. They're not going to be just $50,000.
So what
50,000 people.
So what about the impact on Pittsburgh? How do you think it would impact this region? Do you think we might see some of the negatives that people talk about in Seattle? Cost of housing, traffic, things like that?
Well, you know, with 50,000 jobs, just to put in a little perspective, that's roughly the same amount of jobs, local jobs that UPMC, which is our largest employer in Pittsburgh, has. So it would be similar to that type of presence here. So, and you can see how UPMC's presence has grown over the year. years. So it definitely would be a huge influx of workers. So it could potentially have an impact on the cost of living here. But we already have such a low cost of living that that's a good selling point. Could you imagine going to some of these other places where there's a larger cost of living, or at least comparable sized city? It could affect them even more.
And remember, we haven't heard what that configuration is of those 50,000 jobs. We don't know back office. We don't know customer service. You know, we don't know if they're software engineers.
We also don't know one other thing. Implicit in everything we say here is CMU is a big asset, but how many students do they graduate a year, and what are they going to? I mean, they're going to have their own employees, and so maybe that negates some of that.
You mean the pipeline?
Yeah.
Right,
the pipeline.
and there's already they're already hiring. You know, all these other companies, Google and Uber, are already hiring a lot of CMU
Some of the CMU
graduates.
people
So.
graduate with degrees in trumpet, and others have history degrees. So I mean, keep that in
I mean, that's
perspective,
true. That's absolutely true.
too. Yeah.
All right, we'll follow this along. Thanks to both of you for your insight. We will take a break. Come back with some final thoughts in just a moment.